So you heard a really compelling and interesting talk this morning about how important environmental risk factors are, and toxins, and some of that we can control, some of that we can't control. But the other piece is genetics. A lot of people want to know, why do I have Parkinson's, or would my family member be at risk, or should I care if it's genetic or not genetic? And so I'm going to talk about that in general, but specifically related to a study we have going on, which is really interesting. It's called the PD, Parkinson's disease, generation. So it's like generation, but the word gene emphasized because it's about looking at the genetics. And I want to talk about how this study is going on. Everyone could participate if they want to. I'll tell you about that. But even if you didn't participate, it's really important to know what's going on with genes and how might that influence how we get treated in the future. Because when we learn about the genes, why is this person at risk, or why did that gene change cause Parkinson's, we figure out what was that gene's job. And then we say, what went wrong? And we can try to fix that problem. So finding the genetics can lead us to, why does this happen? How can we fix it? So all of us in the world of Parkinson's, you guys and all of us, we are trying to put pieces of a puzzle together, and it may not just be one thing. It's probably the mix of your genes and your exposures, and maybe other things we haven't sorted yet. So I want to thank Megan Deeney. She's from the Parkinson Foundation. She assembled a lot of these slides. And Kayla Lashinger, she's our genetic counselor, along with Lee Kugelman, our other one. And they helped contribute to this stuff. So this was kind of a team effort. So in case you keep hearing Parkinson Foundation, just to tell you who that is, it's an organization that really tries to promote research, care, and education about Parkinson's. And so their goal is to make life better for people with Parkinson's. And that's using what we already have and finding new things. And they try to make it their purpose to reflect the needs and wants of people who have Parkinson's. So they have these 3 pillars. Their pillars are research. Research means doing science to find out what's causing it, how can we treat it, how can we make it better. Care means, how do we help people who already have it? And so that means they go around and they try to designate centers of excellence. So you're around one of them here at UF, but they go across the country. They look for the best care so that they can help people with Parkinson's find, where can I get good care? And then they do studies to figure out what's going better. And if they see that people in Gainesville have less falls, or maybe we do worse on something, they figure out what's going differently in places where people do better, and then they teach other places to do that. And then we have education, which is things like this, supporting lectures, handbooks. On their website, they have just a plethora of different brochures and booklets online about different aspects of Parkinson's, medication, surgeries, and different things. There's a hotline, which I'll show you the number of, that you can call for free advice. So it's basically a lot of resources. And this project, called PD Generation, is kind of spanning those pillars. So it's a research project that's hoping to help care and also education. So it's the goal is to map the future of Parkinson's disease, and this is how we'll spend our time together today. We're going to talk about what is the PD Generation Project, and we're going to abbreviate it PD Gene because it's a mouthful. Why is it important? What is the history of this study, and how did it evolve, and how is it evolving? And what have we learned so far about the genes in Parkinson's? And then this particular study, how does it go? What if I want to be in it? How is it being done? And what are the future plans for the study? So what is the PD Generation study, and why is it important? Well, each person with Parkinson's, you probably know this, is unique. It's not like all people have the same Parkinson's, just like we don't all have the same heart condition or blood pressure condition. There are lots of different factors. People get Parkinson's at different ages. They have other health conditions. If you also have strokes, or you also have a heart condition or arthritis, all those things affect how your function is with your Parkinson's. How much money do you have in your bank account? Sometimes that affects what medicines you can afford. How close do you live to a center of excellence or even a neurologist? That can affect how easy it is for you to get taken care of. Do you have people in your life that are supportive? Do you get good information? So those are outside factors, but also inside factors like our own biology affects why one person's Parkinson's is different than another. And you might see someone with Parkinson's that's running 5Ks and another person who's in a wheelchair. And the one might look at the other and go, oh my goodness, is that what's in store? But that person may have a whole different genetic composition and outside factors. And so it's kind of like fingerprints, that we all have a different fingerprint. Everybody's journey with Parkinson's is unique. And we think that genetics has a role in deciding that. So what does genetics mean? Genetics is kind of the field of science of how our biology is determining what conditions we have in our makeup. So you might think of genetics as like a cookbook, and our genes are the recipes for how different areas of our body develop things and different processes. So we get gene copies from our mom and our dad. We get a copy from each, and they come together, and sometimes they jumble up and make changes that we call mutations or variants. And lots of gene variants are normal, or they cause no problems at all. They give us our unique, why are we not exactly like mom and not exactly like dad? It's because of the combinations and some of these changes and variants. But sometimes those variants or mutations cause disease because they disrupt pathways that are supposed to go a certain way. And so we have thousands of genes, tens of thousands of genes, and they all have a complex interplay. We haven't figured out most of them, but some of them we have. And slowly we're even figuring out that if you have two different gene changes, maybe that makes the one more important. So it's really a complex, it's kind of like if you make a recipe and your pepper is low, but your salt is also high, these things, one thing influences the other. So why would we test our genes? Because like I mentioned, if we can find that everyone with Parkinson's had a certain gene change, then we can say this might be the cause or might be contributing. And then scientists can trace what does that gene encode, meaning what does that recipe produce? And we find what biological process needs to be repaired or corrected or compensated. So if we find that, we can first of all learn about the disease. We can learn that certain genetic mutations may be associated with certain symptoms. We know that certain genetic mutations encode a Parkinson's that's more likely to have cognitive changes. We know that certain genetic mutations are likely to cause younger onset Parkinson's. And then we know certain genetic mutations in other movement disorders make it more likely someone might do better with deep brain stimulator surgery. So eventually we can learn about the genes and what we call phenotypes, which means what comes out of that gene. Like what do you actually see happen in your life when you have that gene change? The other thing that's obvious is our family might have interest in knowing if we carry a gene that's really likely to pass on Parkinson's or one that's not that likely to, doesn't raise your risk a lot. So if you can say, well, that's obvious that this is important, why doesn't everyone get gene testing? Why don't we just do this all the time? Well, one of the reasons is cost. So a lot of times insurance doesn't cover genetic testing, and insurance companies can say, well, if you don't have a cure yet and it's not going to change anything, why should we pay for it? And it may be expensive. It's getting more accessible over years, but at least when it first became available, it was sometimes cost prohibitive. And we don't even have all the genes sorted out yet. We just know some of the genes that can cause Parkinson's. There are something we call direct-to-consumer products, which is like the 23andMe. Have you guys ever heard of that? It's something where a person could order their own test and send it off, and this company tells them, you have all these genes changes or variants.
They went bankrupt this week.
Yeah.
I did hear this rumor. Well, none of us are that heartbroken about that because they only test for certain variants. Even in that particular known gene, they only test for certain variants of that gene. So it's not comprehensive. And it comes with no counseling. So it's like you have XYZ 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you go, what does that mean? And so you don't really have the appropriate medical follow-up, what to do with that. And we've even had cases where people had some outcome that was given to them by that didn't match subsequent testing. So, there are issues with direct-to-consumer testing. And the other thing is, what's really exciting, and I want to impress, is we are now actively having drug trials where drugs have been invented specifically for people with certain genetic mutations. So you're going to hear some names you've never maybe heard of, like LRRK2 and GBA. These are certain names of genes, and we have drugs in development being tested that are specifically targeting the problem that comes up in your biology if you have that gene change. So imagine a world, maybe we'll see this, where you get your finger prick or blood test and it says, these are the medicines that will work for you. That's kind of like the hope, is that we can have a more specific. Right now, it's like putting a net in a pond and pulling up all the fish together and giving them the same food or something. We are giving everyone with Parkinson's the same list of options, and we don't necessarily know how to do that differently because of one gene versus another. But that's actually actively changing. There are multiple drug trials going on that are genetic based. But if I tell you, I have a new drug study for LRRK2 carriers, and you're like, I don't know if I'm a LRRK2 carrier. So the goal is for people to kind of be empowered, to know what they may be eligible for, and also to inform the medical community how common these different genes really are. So this particular study has a few exciting aspects. One of them is free of cost. So cost is a big barrier that probably accounts for some of the discrepancies in healthcare, why certain communities have more inferior health outcomes, and that, their access to be able to afford things that help their health is limited. Well, this is done free. Anybody can join. It doesn't matter if they're an adult only. They can't be a child, but if they're 18 and up, anybody can do it. Doesn't matter their age, location, their race. Even if they don't have a Parkinson doctor, they can actually sign up online. And I'll show you how they're sent something that lets them participate from home, even if they don't have a neurologist that is at a site. So the other thing that's unique is, in the past, all of our genetic research, you didn't get your results. So you had to be altruistic and doing it for the greater good, but nobody told you if you had it or not. So this one, they actually report back to the person and deliver the result. And I'll tell you more about that. So the mission is to better manage Parkinson's treatment and care, to contribute to science, to develop new things, and to help enrollment in clinical trials that have a genetic basis. It's also to be part of a big community, and you'll see how big this community really is. So these are the 7 genes that are tested. I told you that not every single gene in the planet that might be associated with Parkinson's is tested, but these are the 7 that we know account for the majority of known genetic causes. And they're called GBA1, LRRK2, SNCA, Parkin, PINK1, PARK7, and VPS35. So what do we know so far about those 7? We know that GBA1 is the most common genetic risk factor. It's a huge chunk of the genetic Parkinson's. LRRK2 has been associated with familial Parkinson's, people who know they have multiple family members. And Parkin is the most common cause of young onset. And this is well, let me just tell you, let me explain what's here. You might say, so what happens if I get a genetic test result? And we'll go through this step by step, so don't get too hung up on the slide having a lot on it. What if I get a result that says, no, you don't have any of these 7? We call that a negative result. So if you get a test, 85% of people don't have one of these 7. And that's why Dr. Dorsey is saying it's not all the genes. That's why he's saying that. 15% of people have one of these genes. So if we take 100 of us in this room, we probably had at least 200 people. If of those with Parkinson's, 15 out of every 100 would get an answer that they have a gene that might be part of why they got Parkinson's. So if you're one of those 15%, what does that mean for your family? Well, the truth is, it's a different answer depending on which gene you carry. So there are kind of multiple ways genes pass on. One of those ways is called dominant. A dominant gene is one that if you get it, you definitely get the problem. And you only need one, well, it means you only need one bad copy that could cause that problem. That's what we call dominant. So if you got a good copy from dad and a bad copy from mom, you could have the condition because it's dominant. People who have a dominant gene have a 50% chance of passing that because they'll pass one of their 2 copies to their kids. But even if the kid gets the gene, it doesn't mean they get Parkinson's. Each gene has a different percentage, and they're more like 30% chance. So even from the 50% chance of passing it, it could be that only 30% have symptoms ever. So we don't recommend testing people who don't have any symptoms because they could carry a gene and it could make them think, this is going to change my whole life, and they may never have a symptom. So that's a tricky part, but it also can give us some sense to watch them and pay attention if they have symptoms that are important. The other thing is a recessive gene. A recessive gene means it only affects you if you get 2 copies that are abnormal. So if you carry a recessive gene, there's only a 25% chance that it affects the person you pass it to, because you may pass one, but it would only affect them if they got another bad copy. So you don't have to get all that you hear the first time, except to know that different genes have different chance of passing. So even if you carry a gene, it's found, it doesn't mean that a person that you give birth to will have that. And even if they get the gene, they probably won't get Parkinson's. The majority won't. What if I get a negative gene? Does that mean my family's totally safe? There's no chance they get it. Of course, it doesn't mean that. If Parkinson's runs in the family, there's a higher chance of getting it. And it might even be double. But the chance in the general population of getting Parkinson's, if no one in your family has it, I've seen estimates of 1% chance up to maybe 4% chance. The chances of getting it if you have it in your family would be more like, and I actually edited this slide, and I'm sorry that I think they accidentally put up my old version, but that's okay. It should say 1 to 4% if you have no family history, and maybe 2 to 8% if you do have family history. So it's just like if diabetes runs in the family, if heart conditions run in the family, we pay more attention. But it's still a very low chance. So there's still more than 90% chance that they don't get it if it runs in the family. So the reason this is we don't have every gene sorted out, and not having a known gene doesn't mean there's not a gene there. Okay, so let's talk about now specifically this particular study and what we know so far. In the past, the way we've thought about who should we talk about genes with was really people who have a family history. So if you told me, yeah, my brother's got Parkinson's too, or my dad had Parkinson's and now I have Parkinson's, then of course, I don't have to be a genius to say, well, it must run in the family. So that's when I would have thought about genetics. Also, if we see someone who gets Parkinson's younger than you're kind of supposed to, so young onset, if someone was 35 and they had Parkinson's, we know it's more likely they have a genetic form than someone who has it at the usual age, which would be more like 60 years old. So we call it young onset if it's under 50 years old. Some people say even under 40. It's different criteria. And there are certain ancestries that raise your chance of getting Parkinson's. So Ashkenazi Jewish and North African Berber descent has a higher chance of getting Parkinson's. So in the past, if you had that stuff, we might talk about genetics. But now we're realizing it's not just those people at risk. And so this is how this kind of evolved. The first phase of this study was what they call a pilot, which is like a test run. And there were 600 people, so that's a very big pilot. And they wanted to see, is this even possible that we can manage all these people, do testing, give them results, and do counseling? So what do I mean by counseling? A genetics expert, we call that a genetic counselor, will actually meet with the person by telemedicine, meaning they're over the computer, over the phone, and explain it and tell you what percent chance, what do we know about this gene? Is this a good one? Is this a bad one? What do we know? And so they thought, is this even feasible that people can do this? And so they did it with 600 people. They finished that by 2020. It went well. It went on to the next phase, which is called phenotyping. What does that mean? It means once we figure out what genes people have, what we want to know is like, what does that mean? So getting the symptoms of those people to kind of match that. So different gene changes could be matched with what happens in people who have it. And that finished in 2021 with almost 2,000 people. The next phase is called a registry, which is getting more and more people to participate, building up a big data bank of DNA so future scientists can do research on the genes and try to solve the problem. And that involved 18,000 people. So this is like a huge study as far as studies go. That finished in 2024. And now it's in the expansion phase where they're trying to get even more people involved. There are over 20,000 already, and this is ongoing. And this is just a graph to show you from 2020 till today how it's just like steadily increasing the number of people participating. The average age of these 22,000 people and more are about 60 years old when most people were diagnosed with Parkinson's. Actually, the truth is 60 years old when they had symptoms, but it took 2 years to get diagnosed for most people. So most people were diagnosed at the average age of 62. They participated in this study at the average age of 69. And for more than 3/4 of people, this was the first clinical research that they ever participated in. So it's kind of like a neat way that people can access being part of research when maybe they never have done that before. So the other thing that's happening is collaboration with other genetic research groups that are working on Parkinson's. So one of those is called GP2, Global Parkinson's Genetics Program, and one is called ASAP, Aligning Science Across Parkinson's. And so instead of everybody trying to do the same thing in different ways, they're actually combining resources, and they're taking what's called de-identified data, which means separating the person's name, so it's, you know, kind of like more anonymous, and combining it and doing research on the greater number. So that advances science a lot faster. And more than 70,000 people have participated in this. 31,985 of those are people with Parkinson's. So they have data of people with and without because they want to see what's different in people with Parkinson's. So that's pretty exciting. You can see that this is a very global effort. So the PD gene study is the greatest contribution is here in the United States, but it's expanded to Canada, to South America, and to Israel. So it's increasingly migrating across the globe. And there are more than 20,000 people in it. More than 2,000 veterans alone are participating. And 12% of the people who participated were given a genetic variant that was detected. So you saw this briefly in Dr. Dorsey's talk, and let me explain what it is. On the left is when they were at 15,335 people. 2,109 had one of those 7 genes detected. So it's not insignificant. That's more than 1 in 10 people were given a genetic diagnosis. Which ones are common? Among those who were positive, 58% had this gene change called GBA1. 18% had LRRK2, 18% Parkin, and all the other 4 each were less than 1%. So 3 of them made up the majority of the Parkinson's detectable genetic cases. 3% of people had more than 1 abnormality. And that's even more interesting because we think that they would compound each other's risk if you carry more than 1 genetic change. So another thing that happened over the course of the study is that they expanded the number of genes being explored. So I'll explain this slide. It talks about 3 ways of doing genetic analysis. One of them is called a panel or chip test, and that's where you only look at a few things that you think are important. You already know they might be important, and you only look at those. Then we have something called whole exome sequencing. So in our gene code, there are certain areas called exomes that are known to be actively encoding things and having active plans. And so if you only test those, which used to be the most comprehensive thing that we would do, that's only 2% of our whole DNA. But now it's moved to what we call whole genome sequencing, which sequences 98% of the DNA. So it was in all of our lifetime that this even became possible to do this. And this is actually now looking for, are there more genes that we're not paying attention to that might be part of Parkinson's? And so the cool thing that they've done is they've actually opened up where you get to choose when you participate. If you don't even want to know if they find something else, like just tell me if I have the Parkinson's stuff. If you know I'm going to get cancer, I don't want to know. Or you can say, yeah, I want to know everything you find out. And there are a few genes of interest that we know have high risk of certain other conditions where if you want to know, they can tell you, and then your doctor can screen you for those things. So let's talk about how that study goes. So I've told you a little bit about like what are genes, why do we care, how will it help, why does it matter to me and to the whole world of Parkinson's. Now this particular study. So the goal is to get genetic results, give them back to people, and to have a genetic data repository. That means they build up a whole bunch of samples so that future testing and research can take place. And they're going to extract the DNA and save it for future research use independent of the person's name. And then they want to match outcomes to that data so we can learn what that means if you have that. So anyone over 18 can participate and get testing and counseling. And that can be done in English or Spanish. So those are the two languages currently available. And this can be done at a local site like at UF or remotely. So this is what you have to participate. You have to have a diagnosis and meet this particular criteria that says, yes, you have Parkinson's. You have to be willing to have a blood sample, and you have to be able to be aware enough to say, yes, I want to do this, and yes, I want to participate. We call that having capacity to give informed consent. So we'd want someone to participate because it's their desire to participate and to be able to fill out a survey. This is not for people who have what we call atypical Parkinsonism. So if you've heard about multiple system atrophy or PSP, these other conditions that are kind of related, it's not for that. This is really focused on Parkinson's. If you've received a blood transfusion within 3 months, you can't participate because you've received a different blood sample, and that's going to mess up the results. So you would have to wait until 3 months later. If you're getting treatment for lymphoma, leukemia, or have had a bone marrow transplant for similar reasons, you couldn't participate. And we don't involve children who have child onset, which is rare. So the 4 steps are informed consent. That means someone has to explain, what is this? Why is it being done? And then the person has to sign, yes, I want to be part of that. They fill out about a 1-page summary of some personal information. The blood sample is taken, sent off, and then the results are delivered. And this is in a little more detail. The consent can happen virtually online or in clinic. Then there's a 1-page data form with some information like how old are you, what age were you diagnosed, and so forth. Then the blood sample can be done one of 2 ways. One is the normal way, which is someone draws your blood like a phlebotomist. But there's this really cool new thing I'm going to show you that you can actually do it yourself. That's kind of like, what? But I'll show you what we mean by that. Once it gets sent off, it takes 6 or 8 weeks to get your results. So there's time, and then there's a result. You get a phone call that lets you schedule the genetic counseling visit where the person explains it if you do have a gene change. If you don't have it, you don't need counseling, but if they find something, they will offer you counseling, and then they'll mail you the result. Then the optional parts are you decide, do you want to know if you have those other findings that might come up? And you could potentially decide you want to be contacted if there's future research related to your gene. So those are optional. So we talked about those 7 genes I read that were known to be associated with risk of Parkinson's, but there are 21 additional genes that are maybe. So we know the ones we know we're testing. There are 21 maybes probably associated that are being explored. And it might come out of this that we find out they're more important or less important than we thought. And then there are 10 what we call actionable things tested, which are known. For instance, one of them we know has a high risk of breast cancer. And if a person wants to know and they have that, they're told. This is called a BRCA mutation. And then they would know how important it was for their doctor to do mammograms and be on the lookout. And there are some other ones that apply to that. So those parts are the optional parts. If you want to know if you have a secondary gene that's a maybe association, and if you want to know if you are found to have something else important. So this is like one of the coolest things that I think has come out of this study for me was this thing called a Tasso kit. So it's this new innovation that's really cool because one of the biggest problems is the blood draw. So if any of you have been in our clinic, you probably waited till your doctor came in. You probably spent longer than the time that we scheduled you for. And then you're tired, you need to get home. And we need to get your blood if you want to do this. And then Miss Amanda might be busy with other things, or you might be in a rush, or your driver's in a rush. So the blood draw can be a slowdown point. Well, they have this thing where you can actually do it yourself. So it's kind of cool. You peel it like a sticker and you put it on your arm. They have you do a few steps like warming up your arm. And there's a video that explains it. I watched last night. It's very clear and step by step. You put this sticker thing on, you push this button and a little lance makes a little prick. And then you leave it for a few minutes, and there's a little vacuum that kind of just gently removes a drop of blood, and you see it fill that little tube that's hanging down. And when it reaches the line, you just simply peel it off, and you package this thing, you remove it, and close the lid, and you mail it. So it's pretty cool. It's kind of like a stick that's very simple, just on the side of the arm. So that's an option that has been kind of invented to make things like this actually feasible, meaning doable. So that's the website that has this. Parkinson.org is the Parkinson Foundation website, and this /TASO shows that video. And there are over 1,000 people who have already done that. So it was actually doable for 1,000 people. So it was kind of neat. It's actually working. And people can choose if they prefer that or they just want someone to draw their blood in clinic and not have to deal with that. Both are fine. So this is the hotline I mentioned, and if you actually don't write it down, if you Google Parkinson Foundation hotline, you'll hit it pretty quickly. It's a really neat resource because from 9 to 7, Monday through Friday, it's free to ask a question about Parkinson's, and they have experts that are nurses or physicians. Clearly, this is not how you manage your Parkinson's. They can't give you advice, should I take extra Cinnamate, but they can answer questions like, is there anyone that's a Parkinson's expert in Idaho, or, something like that. And they are also there to answer questions about this particular study. They also have Spanish-speaking people on the other end of the line, if that's helpful for people. So where is this thing going? The top goal for 2025 is to increase enrollment, and they're hoping to get 6,000 participants in the first 6 months of 2025. So those dots each represent an individual with Parkinson's who's participated in the study. So you can see us in the corner in Florida that we have quite a lot of participation. You can see a lot of empty zones on the west half of the United States. And what's interesting is that probably mimics where there are expert centers or where there are centers participating. And here you can see the centers that are part of this project, several here in Florida, which is great, and across the United States. So they're expanding, like I mentioned, into Latin America and Israel. They really want to have a more diverse participant base. So the problem with a lot of research is that it's almost all Caucasians. And we draw conclusions on how we treat people of all descent, ethnicity, and racial background based on research studies that really are only a subset of that general population. We really want our research to be in people that match where the treatments go. So they're really trying to emphasize everyone to participate, not just a small, homogeneous, meaning really similar group of people. So in summary, the PD Generation study is trying to serve as a bridge between research and future care. And the goal is to accelerate scientific research by everyone rallying together and contributing to have this big data sample where we can learn from together. So that's all I have. We have a little extra time before the next session. We have a good 5 minutes or so if anyone has any questions related to the PD Generation study or related topics. And I want to also mention that if you want to do this, you can actually see me or Amanda here today or just when you come in clinic. If you don't see us in clinic, you can also go online, and if you Google PD Generation or search it on whatever your favorite search engine, it will take you there, and you can actually reach out in that way too.
My question was just, do they send it to the lab? Like, I know Ambry is is a genetic lab that's doing a lot of work. Is that where these results are sent to Ambry, or is PD Generation a separate entity comparable with Ambry?
That, I actually don't know the answer to that. If your question is what lab do they use, I actually don't know that. Okay. I mean, they're all going to the same lab, but I don't know if it's that one or not. Yeah, I know that one of the companies that does commercial testing is the Invitae company. I don't know if they use the lab that you're saying.
Well, I referenced Ambry because my sisters were all genetically tested and all in different parts of the country. And no matter if I went to a local MRI imaging place and had blood drawn, or a LabCorp, a regular doctor's office, all the results were sent to Ambry. All of our results are from Ambry. And we're all over the country.
Yeah, that's
why because they seem to have the most genetic.
Yeah, I wish I knew which lab they actually use. But I know it's one lab. I just don't know if it's that one, because everything, when you receive that TASO kit, if you go that route, and again, if you've even had testing and you're just curious, do I have one of these other ones? There's no reason you can't do this for free also. But it comes in like there's a pre-addressed mailing.
okay.
Mailing little box that you put it in there.
Does it
And
seem
it,
like-
what's cool, there are actually other groups that are using genetic testing too in research. There's one called the PPMI. And in our clinic, we do that one too. So there's another one that's really focused on African Americans. It's called Black PD, that's looking specifically at that gene population. And there have been these collaborations where you're saying, wouldn't it be good if it all goes to one place? That's what I was talking about, where these other research oriented, because the clinical one, meaning a lab is a financially driven entity. Yeah. This is a research entity for the purpose of knowledge and care. So those kind of are different pools. Okay. They might still use the same lab resources, I'm not sure. Okay. But these different research entities are combining. They're actually helping people, if you want to be in this, do you also want to be in that? So they're giving people opportunities to participate in more than one, because like, good, get all the researchers working on this at the same time. The other thing you might ask about is like, does everyone get the same genetic counseling? Someone might wonder about that, unrelated but kind of related to what you're saying, like how homogeneous or how consistent is like how the process is. And right now there's a main genetic counseling coming from Indiana University. Wherever you live, that is where your counseling comes, unless your doctors have decided we want to do it ourselves. So some centers have good resources or really good familiarity. We do have 2 genetic counselors. We still use the main one, but we also offer our counselors. Another important question is, what if I don't want to be part of research, but I want to know, or what if I miss this chance, this finishes, and 5 years from now I decide, shoot, I really wish I did that. You can get commercially available testing for certain genes of Parkinson's, meaning just like when we order a blood test and you go to the lab and they draw it, and it goes through your insurance in that normal way, if you have insurance, but it's sort of handled the way a normal lab does. And we do have 2 genetic counselors where if this came up outside of this study or this finishes, they would meet with the person, ask them about their risk factors, decide what panels should be ordered, and get it sent off. So there are other ways too.
Just received her Tasso kit, I think Wednesday
Awesome.
or Thursday. So yeah, that's very good.
You gotta watch the video, because I learned watching the video last night. It's really clear, like you watch someone do the whole process. And she shows you, like, there's a little heating pad, and she shows you exactly what to do and how to hold it, how to, once you watch that, you'll feel much more confident, because I imagine did you feel just a little intimidated, like, what do I do with this thing? Or maybe you did, maybe you didn't. But for me, seeing her go through it, I felt like, okay, now I know how this goes. It was maybe a 10-minute video at most. Yeah, if you don't have that web link, let me write it for you, because I think it was super helpful.
Very good. Any idea the lag time between submitting it and getting results?
6 to 8 weeks.
6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah. So, and then after they get the result, they contact you to set up that appointment to learn what to make of what you find out. Unless it's just normal and you don't carry any of those, then they will just tell you that, and then they'll mail it to you.
Okay.
So you have the record of it.
It came pretty quickly too.
Did it? Okay,
Just
good.
like 2 weeks maybe.
Took 2 weeks to get it. That's good.
Yeah, I'm fairly new diagnosed with PD. I was talking to my brother the other day, and we were talking about the general rule in the past, the medical community wasn't very good about sharing information and research. Has that changed at all? Is there a clearinghouse? I know you mentioned some global studies with gene therapy, with gene.
I feel
But is
like
there
it's
a
changing.
clearinghouse of all of these tests going on and people are sharing information?
That's exactly what's happening in PD genetics. Different scientific communities have more of this guarded nature of, you are infringing on my discovery. The Parkinson world is really, I feel like, different. I feel like people really want to help people with Parkinson's, and really, the majority really are saying, great, if you want to work on this too, let's combine. And genetics is actually a little bit exceptional in how many people you need to have involved to have meaningful results. You need to have a lot of people, and that's why this has only worked by putting centers all over the place and letting people come in. And also this idea of combining data sets, like this PPMI is another group of Parkinson's. It's a biomarker database where they're collecting blood, cerebrospinal fluid, clinical things, meaning what you tell people, and they're adding genetics. And so combining all of this is going to advance the field a lot more. Another thing that might come up with you and your brother, if your brother doesn't have symptoms yet.
Oh, it's me. He and I were just talking.
Yeah.
He doesn't have Parkinson's, I do.
Right, but I meant if your brother doesn't, he probably is raising an eyebrow, of course, because he cares for you, but also he might wonder, am I at risk too? And so initially this is only testing people who have it, but if you have one of those genes and you're going to learn about it, you have the right to invite him onto the Zoom call to listen in. In the future, right now it's not recommended to genetic test people that it runs in their family but they don't have it yet, because of what I told you, because they could carry a gene that never causes any problem. But in the future, this will possibly change, because right now we don't yet have the cure, and we don't yet have the thing that if we do it, we can definitely really slow down your Parkinson's. We have lots of treatments. We know that exercise probably makes people have a better course, and certain things. But in the future, when we get that cure, and when we get that, what we call disease-modifying treatment, we're going to want to know you have it before you know you have it, or even the very beginning, because we'll be able to change it or cure it. And so at that point, we probably will be testing people at risk. There's a certain sleep disorder that we know if you have that particular sleep disorder called REM sleep behavior disorder, which is a problem when people are sleeping and they kick and punch and move because their body's not paralyzed when they're dreaming the way it's supposed to be. We know that that can be a clue that a person is at high risk of developing Parkinson's in the subsequent years. In the future, we might say, if you have this sleep disorder and you have a family member, we should do your genetic testing. And that'll be if we know we can make a difference by knowing sooner. So eventually, that's the hope, is to be at that kind of a point where if we know it, we can fix it. But realistically, in the not distant future, already happening are drug trials that are targeting the different kind of protein pathways. A slide that, this set that didn't come up, I'm sorry, this was like an old version they accidentally pulled up. But one of them that I added was to explain, like, what do all those letters mean? Like, one of them is a mutation where if you have that, your body can't recycle the way it's supposed to the abnormal clumped up proteins. So we have all these pathways that clear stuff and do normal processes, and one of them we figured out, that one affects the recycling of clumped up proteins. And we have this protein called alpha-synuclein that we know is important in Parkinson's and clumps, deposits. We know that it causes something called Lewy bodies under the microscope. One of the mutations actually has to do with alpha-synuclein production and processing. One of them has to do with the mitochondria, which are these energy-producing cells that let us handle stress and run cell processes. You don't have to remember any of that. The point is the different mutations, we're figuring out why is that causing Parkinson's and how do we fix that part of the problem. And so they're doing drugs now that are specifically affecting those different pathways. So it's really a cool and exciting time. And the most awesome thing is that we do have some of us experts that are really all in on the environmental side. And some of us experts are really all in on the genetic side. And some of us are just all of it. We don't care. We will do any of it. And so there's just a bunch of research going on trying to just move things forward as quickly as we can.
And AI is being incorporated into that too? This AI?
AI is actually, so that's this artificial intelligence. It's this kind of exciting and scary and interesting thing that's happening where technology can predict things, technology can analyze giant data sets, and yes, it's being used in the science of Parkinson's. They're trying to do things like here's one example. In Parkinson's, one of the therapies we have is deep brain stimulator surgery. We're just chatting. Are we?
Ready to switch out when
Okay.
you guys are ready?
I'll finish this question and then we'll switch out. So deep brain stimulator surgery, you've probably heard of it. It's like a pacemaker in the brain. There's a wire, a battery, and it uses electrical pulses. AI has actually been used to predict what settings will work for that person based on their brain coordinates. So they map it with an MRI and a CT. They give it to the computer. The computer comes out and says, these targets, probable best stimulation is this setting. So that's exciting. AI is looking at these giant data sets. You asked about these repositories to say, these people had, let's talk about something really scary, dementia. How do I know if I could be more at risk, or how do we know how to prevent it? And it can look to see what medicines were used, what did they exercise, what did they do differently? So it's actually looking at predictors of certain relevant outcomes. And yes, this is a really huge area right now in brain science and every science, really. Thank you so much for your attention. Really appreciate all of you.